Welcome to another episode of the Weber podcast, the only podcast in the Western Balkan region dealing specifically with public administration reform. Weber initiative was started in 2015, and this year we mark 10 years anniversary of the Weber initiative, and we are gathered in Belgrade for the 4th Regional Citizens First Conference, where one of our key topics is human-centric service design and delivery. To discuss this issue in the context of the EU and OECD, but especially in the context of the Western Balkans, to explore how human-centric first of all, what human-centric design is and how it is used across the EU and OECD, but also how it is more and more used in the Western Balkans. I'm very honored to be joined today by Bruno Monteiro. Bruno is an expert with OECD Sigma, a long-standing expert on public service delivery and digitalization, with experience first from his home country, Portugal, but then also across the OECD as a public sector innovator. And most recently, Bruno has joined the Sigma team and is now working with the Western Balkan region, but also with other regions where Sigma is active. Bruno, thank you very much for joining us today. I will just say, because I always forget to introduce myself, I'm Milena Mihajlović Denić, and I'm the Weber team leader, program director of CEP Belgrade, the coordinator of the Weber initiative, and I'm really happy and honored to be the host of this conversation with Bruno today. So, Bruno, welcome to the Weber podcast.
Well, thank you so much for the invitation and for the opportunity of sharing the work we have been doing in Sigma at OECD. I'm very, very glad to be here with you and to celebrate the 10th anniversary. Congratulations, and congratulations to all the colleagues that have been contributing to this work.
Thank you very much, Bruno. So, as I said, we are here to discuss the human-centric approaches in designing and delivering services. So I think it's best to start by actually explaining what human centricity means in this context and how it is applied in the context of the EU and OECD, starting from some strategic directions at the level of OECD and the EU towards human-centric public services.
Well, I think this is a very, very, very well-chosen starting point. The promotion of human centricity, and let's stay literally with the words, is putting the humans at the center of the services we design, the way we manage them, the way we assess their impact, or the way we deliver services using digital technologies or not. It always put these strategic elements, I think, at the forefront. So it's extremely important to have this, I will say, coordinated approach to the promotion of human-centered services. The European Commission has been taking extremely important steps in that regard. I will just remind the Berlin Declaration of 2020, where I think we can be very well played these different principles that put together not just a strong effort on digitalization, which is, of course, obviously important, but promotes digitalization, having in mind the importance, for instance, of engaging not just, I will say, users at the end, but bringing users to the whole process of, ideating, developing, testing services that puts at a very, very high level of priority values like transparency, values like accountability, security, privacy, all these values that make up the European project are translated in a very clear way in the Berlin Declaration that points this very strategic direction for the efforts member states are doing to revisit their services, conceiving new services, and promoting digitalization. Of course, I will say that the strategic direction in itself demands very concrete instruments that materialize and that translate in practice that direction. And for instance, when we look to a program like the Digital Decade 2030, we see that it is about a strategic direction, but it is about a strategic direction that is equipped with the ways of translating some of these principles into practices. The adoption of the electronic identity, for instance, or the digitalization of key public services. All of this can be also very concrete, very palpable initiatives, not just, I would say, inspirational discourse. I will say that from the OECD side, there is a major contribution that I think crystallizes in the 2024 recommendation on human-centered public administrative services.
And this recommendation is a central moment where basically the governments are getting a clear strategic orientation in terms of what they need to do in order to advance towards human-centric.
Well, I really believe that the recommendation was generated at the intersection of two different movements. On one side, there is an accumulated experience. Governments have been doing human-centered design for many years. This is not something that appeared yesterday.
Yes, it is new in our region, maybe. I mean, newer, but across the OECD.
There was this accumulation, but I really think that accumulation was not yet systematized, even from other countries. I think this accumulation, this track record was going to a point of saturation where the demand was to have something that provided a systematic, coherent approach to human-centered public administrative services. On the other side, there was this increasing need for governments to deliver value, not just for digitalizing, but to digitalize in a value-driven way, not just to digitalizing process, but preventing those processes to stay bureaucratic or to stay heavy on users, businesses, or citizens. It was also the moment where, I will call it, environmental constraints, like fiscal constraints, the need to move and step up after the huge shock that the pandemic represented in terms of, managing with efficiency while delivering. So that was extremely important also because it called for public services to embed resilience, but the resilience that has this human centricity as a priority. So on one side, accumulated experience calling for a systematization. On the other side, the changing environment that require that governments are also, I will say, given the chance of enrich their portfolio with this strategic approach. And an approach, as you know, the recommendation, it covers matters of, governance, strategic direction or vision, but it also covers aspects like core foundations, digital public infrastructures you need to have in place, elements of, cybersecurity or privacy that you need to consider. Equipping your public servants and empowering them are also important. And also other aspects, including one that is extremely important that goes beyond the more obvious aspects of, seamless design or inclusive design, is the one about monitoring and measuring the efforts you are doing. So you can keep learning and keep applying it. So I think that both OECD and the EC have now in place a very strong arsenal of, strategic instruments. But again, strategic instruments are extremely important. They give you the direction, they give you the mandate, they give you also all this accumulated experience behind these documents. But still, it's for the governments to adapt it to their context, to translate this into practice. And this is something that is, I would say, unfinished
business in all of the countries. And we know from the Western Balkan context how important coordination is, coordinated action on the level of government, and how detrimental it is when it is difficult to achieve. So let's now move on to some horizon scanning. What are now the emerging priorities for human centricity? For us in the Western Balkans, it is important to learn from the EU and OECD countries to share those experiences. So I think that for our audiences, it would be very interesting to hear what are some of these emerging priorities on the wider scale.
So it's a very good question, and I am going to start by emphasizing the importance of precisely what you said about learning with each other, and throughout the same region is extremely important. Even from the European Union, for instance, when you look at a program like the Compact program that aims to enhance the European administrative space, all this program is based on promoting modernization, but also cross-border collaboration. Single digital gateway or the promotion of live events and services are still initiatives calling for this kind of international cooperation at the level of the European Union. So I will say that that of course applies to the Western Balkans, as we have been seeing for the work that Sigma has been doing just by conducting a parallel assessment of the countries. I think there is this tendency of looking to assessments, looking to the past, like the assessments are an evaluation of something that belongs to the past. Yeah. But I think it's a great opportunity to look at the assessments as an opportunity to look to the future. And so what can we do with this evidence to inform decisions? How can we translate this evidence into something practical? Well, there are for sure in the horizon, and I think it's not a very distant horizon. So I'm going to stay close to the most, I will say, in-your-face priorities that have been emerging for service design and delivery. One of them is for sure the simplification of public services. There is not the first time governments heard and are discussing simplification. This is something that has been occurring for different waves in the past years. There is, of course, lessons learned how to make simplification, I will say, an option by default in the way we do regulations, in the way we design services. And there is also, I will say, new possibilities open for simplification right now.
Such as?
For instance, a very important discussion for simplification that I think is occurring now and goes very well along the topic of the conference you just mentioned about putting citizens first, is precisely the engagement of users and stakeholders at all the moments of the, let's call it, simplification cycle, defining priorities. For instance, when we look to a program like the Simplex program in Portugal, where there is this public consultation, public collaboration to identify priorities, where are the pain points? What are we going to simplify? We are going to simplify where businesses say they are struggling with. We are going to simplify where public servants identify opportunities to simplification. So this is a great moment to do that. There is also opportunity, I will say, for engaging citizens in co-creating potential solutions. So this has been, in terms of simplification, this has been happening in many countries across the European Union. I will just invite the colleagues that are listening to us to take a look at the report the Danish presidency prepared for the European Commission precisely about the ongoing efforts of simplification. So plenty of examples that you will find there throughout Europe. And the other element I can mention about what makes simplification, I will say, a different movement nowadays is the opportunities to tap on new digital technologies. Some of them are not necessarily emergent technologies, like automation has been out there for a long time. But the fact that now we are in possession of structured approaches and we can streamline those approaches to the public administration is extremely important. So participation and automation or the use of other technologies, I think put a simplification at a different level nowadays. So I think it's I will say the same drive to make services simpler for businesses and for citizens, but now I think done under different circumstances. Another point I think we can really emphasize on emerging trends for public services is the fact that there is, I think, the possibility of tapping on inclusion and accessibility as priorities. And this is important for, of course, efficiency reasons. One of the interesting observations that many countries have made is that a big issue was not the creation of a right or an entitlement or a benefit. It was the actual access to that benefit that led to a non-take-up rate staying very high. So you display rights and opportunities, and the target users are not engaging with them. And most of the times, what is being observed is there are opportunities to improve the inclusion and the accessibility of these services. I will say that this is a matter of efficiency, but it is also a matter of core values of the European project. So if you look to the initiatives that the European Commission has been promoting, a new strategy for people with disabilities, the creation and the promotion of the European Union Fundamental Rights Agency, or for instance, the recent promotion of the Accessible EU as a kind of resource center for all the countries, you see there is this, not just an awareness, but I will say an intentional, deliberate support to initiatives in the area of promoting inclusion and accessibility, important for efficiency reasons, but also because public services, and I will end up with this, public services are a key interaction moment in the relationships between users, citizens and businesses and the government. And that means that...
And it will decide the standard by which citizens will evaluate the work of the administration.
That will be exactly my point, is that the work that the OECD has done with the Drivers of Trust survey shows precisely that the biggest trust gaps exist depending on your opinion about if you have or not a say on the decisions your government is making. Is your government sensitive to the feedback you are providing in services? Is your government listening to your contributions and adopting in a visible, impactful way what you are saying? If this happens, what is being noticed is that there is this tendency to trust more the government. And this is extremely important because that helps us to go from what many times is just seen as a purely transactional moment, purely technical operation, you give something, you get something, to the very fabric of the social contract that holds together our society. So I would say this is something extremely important that I think gives human-centered design, together with other tools, together with other instruments, a central position, a pivotal position in redefining what is democratic governance nowadays.
Indeed, and if I can just add, the experience that citizens will have in participating in any such processes will be very detrimental for not only their general trust for the government, but whether they will be part of it or whether they will contribute in the future. So when governments open these processes to the citizens, they better make sure that they really take into account, that they really respond to the needs of the citizens, because if they start these processes but don't deliver, this is then the most detrimental for public trust.
And can I just build on top of that? I didn't choose these two topics by accident. I really think it's important that we bring the conversation about efficiency that in many cases has defined the contours of the conversation about simplification together with the conversation about stability and inclusion. Mm-hmm. They are not incompatible, quite to the contrary, as I think the human-centered approaches demonstrate. They stick together very well, and they are more productive if they are brought together. So one do not need to go without the other, and they are not, I will say, necessarily disconnected. So I think governments can make the best possible use, as I think they are already doing in many cases, leveraging the EC, the OECD guidance, but also their own national experiences.
I exactly wanted to ask you more about the OECD and EU tools that the governments now have at their disposal. We have the Digital Government Index, the Our Data, many different tools that compare the countries, assess the countries, provide guidance for the countries. Could you kind of help us understand this landscape, and maybe for the audiences in the Western Balkans, what are the key tools to look out for?
So I will precisely tap on the tools you just mentioned. So the OECD has been promoting for years the open and reusable data, and also the Digital Government Index. They are key instruments, not just as a benchmarking instrument, but again, as a way to follow up closely on the progresses and the learnings and the capacities that governments have been creating. You will be happy to know that next Monday, the 15th of June, the Digital Government Outlook that brings together in, I will say, a more robust, consolidated picture all of these different instruments at the OECD is going to be launched. So I think it's a great moment that also shows that all these pieces that always shared some, I will say, affinity can now all together into an integrated framework. So I think it's a very important moment also for governments that will have in this digital government outlook a very solid piece, not just of evidence, but also, I will say, of strategic guidance, so where evidence informs decisions. We also have in the European Commission, just to stick to something that I think will resonate a lot with the colleagues that are listening to the podcast, is, for instance, the Public Sector Tech Watch database for the use of emerging technologies in government. So governments have been quite active in trying out and experimenting and trying to grasp the opportunities while being aware of the risks that exist with adoption of these emerging technologies. And if you access this database, you will find more than 2,000 cases of artificial intelligence, of blockchain, augmented reality, you name it.
So plenty of resources
There
to
are
take
plenty of
inspiration
resources,
from.
and you can go there, you can find lessons learned, methodologies being used, contact points. So these two pieces, I think, are just two pieces in a very vast, broad portfolio of resources that exist, but they are extremely important. The other one, because I want to answer your question about the region in particular, it's of course the Sigma assessments. I will say that you have the opportunity in the Sigma assessments of having not just a very comprehensive assessment of your government, which is extremely important because we know that governments act as systems. So you cannot look to transparency and do not look to the efforts that are being made on digitalization and not look at the efforts that are being made on procurement, for instance. So I will use the word, offering a holistic vision of government is extremely important because governments work as systems, right? And even if we still mention silos and disconnection, discoordination, governments still work as systems, and Sigma offer you this opportunity. And then other thing that I think is extremely important is that you don't need to, just take, I will say, generous inspiration from the European Union. You can indeed take a look at how your government, how your public administration is aligning with the key acquis, with the key principles of the European Union, just by looking to the results of the Sigma saga. So it's an opportunity also to keep track of a journey that is a process that we know experience different conjunctures, there are different circumstances, but it enables you to keep this constant learning. This continuity is extremely important because when we are talking about reforms, we are talking about processes in time. We are not talking about circumstantial interventions. And I will end up mentioning the importance of the Sigma assessments, and I will just mention these two reasons: holistic vision, process approach.
Yes, and indeed, our own Weber Power monitors show actually how inconsistent the reform efforts can be over time and how important it is to really keep the spotlight on those processes over a longer period of time to make sure that the pressure is on and that things that are started that sometimes deliver initial good results, but if they're not institutionalized, they can quickly get sidetracked or reversed, especially when staff changes, leadership changes happen. So we are learning how important it is to institutionalize those good practices. And this is actually where an interesting question for our audiences can be to learn about some most relevant examples from either the EU or the wider OECD ecosystem in terms of how they have proceeded with the human-centric design, and also how have they achieved a comprehensive system and institutionalized system, not just some islands of excellence, which we now do observe in the Western Balkans. We see some very good examples of human-centric service design, but these are still isolated cases. We still don't have a system-wide approach. So can you give us some good examples of initiatives that were institutionalized, coherent from EU member states or OECD members?
Well, when we are speaking about human-centered design, as I mentioned in the beginning, that means putting humans at the center. And we know that humans do not stay the same over time, which means that users, citizens, businesses have different needs, have different expectations. Those needs and those expectations change with time. Their behaviors change with time. So human-centered design, almost by definition, is very sensitive to change and needs to keep up flexibility in their methodological, in their, I will say, organizational approaches. At the same time, this needs to be balanced precisely with the point you just made about institutionalizing, of embedding these approaches, giving them a safe haven in government where they can produce results at scale or being mainstreamed. So I will say that, just as a kind of caveat, is that human-centered design, by definition, stays at the center of this tension. On one side, the need to be flexible, open to
agility,
to have a lot of agility, exactly. Use evidence, but sometimes use simply signals, because when you get the evidence, it's probably already too late.
And common sense.
And some common sense. So you need to be very flexible, and at the same time, you need to contribute to some institutionalization. So I will say that some of the most original experiences we can find in the European Union are the ones that balance these two parameters. I will just give you a couple of examples. For instance, I like very much the experience that you can find in France with the creation of safe spaces for experimentation. On one side, you have a coordinated, national-wide network of hubs, labs, testing grounds that by now has more than 100 units connected and sharing examples and learning with each other. And it is kind of institutionalized under this interministerial department. Mm-hmm. But you give the chance that each municipality, each region, each ministry to create the structure they need adapted to their
realities and
to their realities and to their priorities. So I think it's a very interesting case. I will invite you to take a look at this French experience that takes place in the l'innovation publique, that means the public innovation place, mm-hmm. that kind of connects this capillarity across the country, territory. Mm-hmm. the territory in a very coordinated way, with the month of innovation in November, with events that are used to exchange and to learn together, with a program to support the creation of labs. And at the same time, you give the opportunity for public administration, with all its differences, to create their own approaches. So I think it's a very interesting experience that we can find there. The other example I like to give, it's the example from the Netherlands. Mm-hmm. In the Netherlands already have, for 10 years, this network of innovators. That means that you can institutionalize something that whose belonging can change, also because, as we know, public servants can change their public institution. Yes. So public servants can be in Ministry A and next in Ministry B, but they are still connected with this network. So this network.
So wherever they go, the expertise and the experience goes with them, and they stay involved.
And they stay involved. So I think it's a very interesting, solution to keep something institutionalized while at the same time.
And keep process memory in a way.
Keep process memory, enabling, because we know that some of the lasting collaborations, they need time to develop. We also know that some of the most notable impacts of an initiative takes time to reveal. So when you create even this structure that is not necessarily highly formalized, but sometimes it's very informal, it's very fluid, at the same time it enables to create a sense of continuity. So you can create a sense of continuity, you can create a sense of institutionalization, even if you don't go with the traditional approaches of creating a specific team. You can keep this decentralized, flexible, and at the same time enduring across time.
Very interesting lesson, I think, for the administrations in our region. We, as the Weber Initiative, have promoted this concept of Weber Policy Labs, where we have worked with the national authorities and civil societies to using design thinking methodology as one of the, let's say, one of the most widely used human-centric approaches to solve particular specific problems that was agreed between the civil society and the administrations. And at least from what we know, this is the first initiative of that kind that came from the civil society. And our experience was actually that the civil society organizations are extremely well placed as partners of public administrations to help out with the application of these human-centric approaches, because we are already trained and already accustomed to working with the beneficiaries, with the users. It was very natural for us to implement the empathizing phase, especially. Other phases tend to be a bit more technical, and this is where I think this, of course, connection between the civil servants and the civil society activists is absolutely necessary in order to produce something that will be used in the end. But we really enjoyed the collaboration and this division of roles where we were in charge of doing the empathizing stage. So I was wondering if there are any interesting experiences from the EU where this collaboration between civil societies and the administrations is taking place in this area?
Well, indeed, and I think you gave strong reasons why this is happening. I think no one will question the fact that civil society organizations and even individual citizens, right, they are in possession of a very not just articulated and rich knowledge about where improvements lay, where expectations lay for public policies or public services, but in many respects, they also have a very significant expertise in doing that. So I think that kind of collaboration will be absolutely natural, even if you put just at a technical level of like technical exchange. But I think there is the opportunity to consider other kinds of collaborations with civil society. And for instance, many interesting experiences that we are witnessing, and I will give you a couple of them, put civil society organizations not just as providers of knowledge, not just as sounding boards, or even less as protest actors, but instead opens up a shared space where governments can work with civil society organizations, also with other partners from the ecosystem, including universities, for instance, or even the private sector and startups. They create this shared space to think together about potential solutions. For instance, in Spain, in countries, in municipalities that are, of course, very different from each other, like Barcelona or Madrid, you see these community-based services that are designed, they are monitored, and they are delivered based on partnerships between civil society organizations, neighborhood organizations, and public administration, for instance. So these shared spaces for go over all the cycle of the design, the management, the delivery, the evaluation of services to happen together. I will say that other interesting experience that we have been witnessing that I think translate a very practical, outcome-oriented collaboration between civil society organizations and public administrations is on the field of civic tech, right? The opportunity of bringing together tech developers, researchers, activists, if you want, in the field of participation with public administration to find new ways, new tools, new instruments to empower citizens and by empowering citizens, also making, I will say, public administration more responsive, more transparent, more accountable. This is also a very interesting domain where this is happening. Again, I can point you the many examples that are taking place in the Netherlands, and just take a look at the experiences happening in the Hague Tech, in the city of The Hague. There is this hub where startups and civil society organizations and public administration are working together to deliver this kind of work. And the final element I will mention in this collaboration that exists between civil society organizations, let's put it that way, and the public administration, is in the way you can rethink the very notion of inclusion. One of the interesting experiences we witnessed in some European countries, if you are really interested, you can take a look at the many good examples that the 2024 Government Innovation Global Trends report point out.
And thank you for mentioning it, because I was just about to ask you for some good sources that our viewers can refer
this
to.
Is a very interesting. I think it's a very interesting resource. Of course, 2024 can be almost prehistory if we are just fascinated by the technological hype. But if we are looking to what really matters, that means building enduring partnership, building flexible formats, the report still holds relevance. And one of the interesting points is how civil society organizations and governments are working together to co-produce public services. Co-production of public services is nothing new. The OECD has a report from 2011, if I'm not mistaken. So I think there is a lot of work already being done, but not just, again, by efficiency reasons, because there are efficiency reasons to support this kind of collaborations. There is also the question about endorsing key principles, about having an open government, about having responsive public services, about having, principles like participation ensured throughout the whole cycle of public services.
And finally, last but not least, data protection and privacy, which in the context of service delivery and digitalization, especially in the, let's say, less developed democracies of our region, is a constant concern of the civil society specifically. To what extent are we prioritizing advancements in digitalization at the expense of privacy and data protection? Because these two systems have to go hand in hand if the citizens' trust indeed is to be kept. This brings me to our region, and you mentioned Sigma's assessments as one of the key tools that our governments, but also civil societies, have at their disposal to analyze and understand where countries stand on specific principles of public administration, which Sigma has developed in collaboration with the European Commission, the so-called Sigma principles, our Bible, if I can say so, and also. These assessments are a very good tool for the countries of the region to benchmark against each other, to see where they stand against their neighbors, what the neighbors are doing maybe better than them, and also to facilitate this learning. So maybe you can tell us a bit more about the Sigma assessments in this specific area of service delivery and digitalization. What specifically is Sigma looking for there, especially for the enablers of human-centric service design and delivery? And how are the governments using those tools and assessments? We also know that Sigma has other tools through which it works with its beneficiary governments. So maybe you can also mention some other of those tools.
Well, again, I think you put the spotlight on the Sigma assessments and correctly, in my opinion, because again, it's a true assessment. It's an opportunity to look at the government functions in an interdependent way, so you can really understand how things can work. But it is also an opportunity, I think, to help governments to prioritize, to shift, to identify where investments need to be prioritized, or where learnings can be accumulated. So I think it's an opportunity to use assessment not just as a picture, but as a tool, if you want. As you mentioned, the assessments cover. I really want to give you the exact numbers, and I don't want to. Okay, here it is. So you mentioned the Sigma principles, and I think it's an interesting way of looking at it in an integrated way. For instance, just for the area of service delivery and digital government, what you see is that Sigma assessments, they cover the design of public services. So they look, of course, about the legal instruments that are in place, if there is regulation in this area, but also to the concrete practices that are being adopted, which in itself is interesting to look at, because as your assessments also make clear, one of the points where we for sure have an opportunity of improvement is in closing that impact gap that exists between inspiration and implementation, if you want to put that. The Sigma assessments also look to the delivery of high quality services. So it's about of having the right tools and the right principles and the right frameworks, but it is also about delivering value. Mm-hmm. So the assessments are emphasizing very much that part, and they emphasize this part, take into consideration, I would call it a human-centered approach, where benefits from businesses, benefits from users, together, of course, with the benefits for the public administration are covered. The Sigma principles also look at the questions of the accessibility of public services. That means that it is, of course, again, important to have the right tools, the right frameworks. It is important to deliver high-quality services, but it is equally important that the ones who should benefit from those services can effectively access those.
Indeed. And this is also something that the Weber Power Monitor looks at, and where we usually see some pretty disappointing results in terms of the overall accessibility.
Also, because when we are talking about accessibility, we are not talking about the average citizen. We know that these mythical creatures do not exist. Now, there are different users. And for instance, when we are talking about persons with disabilities, we are talking about an experience that cannot be replaced by asking someone else about that experience. So this is extremely important, that we engage people with lived experience. And then in the persons with disability, this is one of the areas where improvements, I think, exist for sure in the region. And finally, I think in this area, the Sigma assessments cover the building blocks of digital government, right? We heard a lot of time talking about digitalization, and digitalization is a process, it's making something digital. But the question is not, in many cases, anymore making things digital, but making things digital without duplicating bureaucracy, for instance. It's about also making things digital, but working as part of ecosystem. So you can have digital pieces like electronic identity. You can have a different part like, for instance, open software solutions, but they need to be part of the same, I would say, portfolio of services. So looking at digital government, looking to these building blocks is extremely important, that it is made like I think the Sigma principles do in a way that is aware of the importance of looking at the single digital gateway together with the existence of signatures. This is extremely important because we know these pieces work together, and they can deliver more value if they explore their synergies, right? Their mutual stimulus. So the assessments are interesting because they cover these, I would say, 4 dimensions in a very detailed, robust way. So again, I don't think the sole benefit of an assessment is to look to the past and see what you have achieved. It is also an important instrument for you to inform coming reforms. So it's an area that needs an improvement is an opportunity. It's not something to, it's not something that should block anything, quite on the contrary.
Indeed, and Sigma does provide recommendations also, which should serve as a sort of a roadmap for the governments for those specific
Happy that you
areas.
mentioned that. That's exactly my point. So I think Sigma tries to do that in the context of the assessments themselves by making those recommendations and those suggestions.
But Sigma also engages with the beneficiaries in other ways, through individual projects, trainings, many trainings. Can you tell us about some of the most relevant or interesting recent or upcoming initiatives that our region's governments should look towards, or the civil societies that we should be aware of, and also maybe some good examples of specific projects in this area that you have done, maybe not only in the Western Balkans, but also in other countries that you have worked?
Well, indeed, I think one of the benefits that Sigma can offer government is this support. This support can be aligned with the reform priorities that countries have. So it's the opportunity to think, improvements aligned with the context. I will give you a couple of examples because I think Sigma can cover the whole spectrum of interventions, from legislation to interfaces. So when you look, for instance, even in Serbia, Sigma was directly engaged with the creation of service standards for public services. This is extremely important because that offers a stable framework to streamline, to mainstream in many cases the way services are expected to be delivered also, and this is extremely important when we are talking about the human-centered approach. Sigma also supports the definition, of course, of strategic approaches, and equally important in translating these strategic approaches into concrete instruments, like roadmaps, for instance. That happens in Kosovo, or that happens in Bosnia and Herzegovina, when there is this support, this ongoing support to translate a vision into concrete interventions for the digital government in this case. Sigma also offers the opportunity, I will say, almost an end-to-end coverage by enabling the improvement of the monitoring and the measurement of public services, be it, for instance, the question.
And this is something that is very often kind of maybe not disregarded, but it's put in the shadow of the design, and we often forget that actually monitoring, reporting, and having this feedback loop is just as important.
The last mention I will do about the Sigma work is we can go administration by administration, but we can also support administrations to exchange and to work together. And Sigma places emphasis in building up regional initiatives. That means it is an opportunity for you to find a haven where you can exchange experience, where you can learn with each other, when you can find, in many cases, the space to think together about solutions that require, by the nature of the challenges they try to answer, regional solutions, maybe. So this is a great opportunity, I think, we can find, thanks to Sigma, is to open up this regional dialogue and this regional collaboration as well.
And I think this is also what makes Sigma and Weber such great partners, because we share these approaches, and our focus on the multi-stakeholder dialogue is actually very, very compatible with what Sigma is doing here. And since I mentioned multi-stakeholder dialogue, Sigma has really been a very important strategic partner of the Weber initiative from the early days. We know how good the collaboration between Sigma and the civil society can be, but maybe for our viewers, you can tell us a bit about how Sigma sees the role of civil society in this specific area.
Well, I think if there is a red thread throughout our conversation, is precisely about the engagement of users, citizens, businesses, civil society, other stakeholders. When we are talking about adopting a human-centered approach to public services, we are also talking about, if you want me, to open up the doors of the cockpit, right, and invite first and foremost users to take the center. I think you made a very good point about the importance of cybersecurity, of privacy or security in general in the digital world. So having these strong foundations in the digital government implies that you never forget that you are delivering services for users, and as the human-centered approach mentions, with users, hopefully. So there is plenty of room. I will say this is part of the deep philosophy that runs through this service delivery.
And I should note here for our viewers to stay tuned. There will be the next Sigma assessment next year in 2027, covering mainly data and developments from 2026. So stay tuned for the next round of reports. My last topic is more about the practical adoption of these approaches in the Western Balkans. Today at the conference, we heard about some individual examples, initiatives, successful ones also. We heard that in Serbia, just recently, the Public Policy Secretariat has worked with partners and the GIZ to innovate and simplify and digitalize services from the National Employment Service, for example. But these are still, as we discussed before, these are still rather isolated cases than systemic solutions. So what are some of the adoption trends in the Western Balkans? And could you maybe single out some key obstacles that prevent adoption or some key, let's say, factors of success?
So I think there are very promising signals, even if they in some cases stay at the embryonic stage of the adoption of human-centered approach for service delivery, like the organization in life events or the creation of proactive services across the region. There are plenty of examples already, and I think these individual examples they sometimes are, even if they look more or less isolated, by the very nature of the project they require to be in place, they can have a systemic nature. What I want to say with this is that...
And usually they do.
And usually they do. If they want to build a life event for the birth of a baby, you need to put in contact plenty of organizations, bring together different registries, different databases. So actually each single project of a life event is indeed the tipping point to activate and to change potentially all the system. Mm-hmm. So you see this happening across the region. There are very interesting results, for instance, in Kosovo with the promotion of the birth of a baby, mm-hmm. and a service that you have also here in Serbia. So there is this opportunity, even if they look like more or less isolated, indeed, by their very nature, this happens. The same applies also to these proactive services that we already discussed. The second point I want to make is for sure a more positive note, is that across the region, multi-channel offer of services and the coverage across territories is very well established. I think it's a very positive point that is being made.
Yes, if I can just mention here, usually the territorial distribution of services is quite good. But then, for example, when we look at the physical accessibility of buildings, that's where we enter accessibility-related problems.
Yeah, and that's another interesting part, and that I want to mention is that these are extremely important enablers, but these do not mean that we are solving once and for all the delivery challenge that we may have. They are like necessary, but not sufficient measures. Also, because one of the I would say trends that has been identified across the European Union is there is this increasing capacity of governments to get a granular vision of users of services. Mm-hmm. So we have been hearing about personalized services, mm-hmm. right? So services that are customized to such a level that the government can proactively take, the contact with you and tell you,
your driver's license is about to expire.
For instance,
you
so
should
you
come
can
in
have
to
this
get
very
a new one
personalized
issued.
element, and this is a possibility that exists, but rely on the presence of this, I will say, basic, these fundamental elements like interoperability.
Which we call enablers, right?
Exactly. So we also see that, of course, there are important standards for websites. There are single portals and catalogs across the region. But when we are talking about easiness of access, it is more consolidated in the legislation than necessarily,
practice.
completely implemented. I think there remain some gaps in the region, and this is something I think is an opportunity to continue this work. Then, when we are talking about
services,
trust services, when we are talking about cybersecurity, we are talking about a very sensitive element, very important element, where we can see a lot of opportunities emerging. I will just give you one example: the creation of the Balkan Digital Wallet. It's a region-wide initiative. So it is not just opportunity for each administration to improve the services being offered to users, to companies, or to citizens, but also to do that working together with the other regional administrations. So this is a point where I see there is a
and also as a good point of preparation for future membership of the EU.
I will say that this will be a great opportunity to a kind of trampoline, because you are doing this concrete initiative already aligned with the eIDAS legislation, already taking into consideration the pilots that are being made for the promotion of digital wallets across Europe. So it's a great opportunity to start at this moment, because you are already starting using these trampolines that the European Union has been putting in place.
Sort of jumping on a moving train and a train with already very good
or leapfrogging, or there are many good images that we can use. Yes. So yes, there is already a moving train, and this is a great opportunity for the administrations to jump on that.
So plenty of sources of inspiration, plenty of tools that both the governments but also the civil societies across the region can use in our monitoring work, in also raising the awareness of these issues in our countries, because obviously communication and awareness of these new tools, new possibilities, new opportunities is extremely important. And again, this is, in my opinion, an area where civil society can work together with Sigma, with RESPA, with other stakeholders, and also national institutions to help build the, let's say, the uptake in the public of these new tools, but also, and I can say in the absence of perfectly organized feedback mechanisms used by the governments themselves, this can help us then, us in the civil society, know where to look for particular tools that we can use for our own monitoring and for, let's say, reporting on the quality of services and on the users' satisfaction. So, Bruno, thank you very much for this very interesting and inspiring conversation. I think that our viewers have gotten a lot of food for thought. We will definitely continue this conversation. We at Weber hope to continue the work that we have started through the Weber Policy Labs, and to continue innovating together with the governments of the region. And I think that we will definitely rely on Sigma's support and advice going forward. So thank you very much for joining us today.
Well, thank you. And I will now expect some feedback from our viewers, because I really think we can put these episodes as part of the biggest stream of collaboration that Sigma is doing with Weber and with all the administrations in the region. So looking forward for
So, dear viewers, you've heard this is an open invitation for you to write to us and to reach out with your feedback, with your ideas, proposals, or concerns. And stay tuned for the upcoming episodes of the Weber policy of the Weber podcast. Today, this was Bruno Monteiro from Sigma OECD, and thank you and all the best.